Red Planet Rising. Chapter 1. Seeds of Discontent. The atmospheric processor wheezed like an old man climbing stairs, and Elena Vasquez knew it was dying. She pressed her gloved hand against the massive recycling unit's outer shell, feeling the irregular vibrations that meant bearing failure in the primary turbine. Through the reinforced viewport of Maintenance Bay 7, the rust-colored Martian landscape stretched endlessly toward the horizon, broken only by the gleaming domes of New Olympia's outer districts, connected by a web of pressurized transit tubes. Another breakdown? Her comm crackled with the voice of James Wright, her maintenance partner, as he descended from the upper inspection platform. "Third one this month," Elena replied, pulling up the diagnostic readout on her tablet. The numbers painted a grim picture: atmospheric pressure dropping in Sector 12, oxygen purity down 18% from optimal, and carbon scrubber efficiency at 60%. "I've submitted 14 repair requisitions to the Colonial Administration." 14, James. You know what I got back? "Let me guess, budget constraints pending Earth fiscal review," James said, his voice bitter with familiar frustration. Elena nodded grimly. At 32, she'd spent her entire adult life maintaining the delicate systems that kept 40,000 colonists breathing. Born in the first wave of permanent settlements, she was among the generation that had never seen Earth's blue skies except in historical footage. Mars was home, the only home she had ever known. Yet every critical decision about their survival had to be approved by bureaucrats sitting 93 million miles away. A commotion outside drew their attention to the viewing port. Below in Central Plaza, several hundred colonists had gathered around Dr. Patricia Wong, a hydroponics specialist who'd been advocating for Martian representation in Earth's colonial parliament. Her voice carried through the thin atmosphere, amplified by portable speakers. "We mine their minerals, we conduct their research, we risk our lives expanding humanity's reach into the cosmos," Dr. Wong declared, her breath visible in the cold air. "Yet we have no voice in the policies that govern our daily existence." The crowd murmured agreement, but Elena noticed the black-uniformed colonial security forces positioning themselves at the plaza's exits. Governor Harrison had made his position clear in last week's broadcast from Earth. Colonial administration serves the greater good of humanity under Earth's guidance. "Elena, look at this," James called from his terminal. A priority message from the governor's office flashed on the screen. "All non-essential maintenance activities suspended pending quarterly budget review. Focus on critical life support only." Elena stared at the message, then at the failing atmospheric processor that kept thousands of people alive in the residential sectors. She thought of her younger brother Diego, who worked in the hydroponic farms that fed the colony, and her neighbor Mrs. Chen, whose infant daughter needed the stable atmospheric conditions that only properly maintained systems could provide. In the plaza below, security forces moved in. Dr. Wong's voice cut off abruptly as the crowd began to disperse under the watchful eyes of the Colonial Guard. Elena made a decision that would change everything. She opened a secure channel to the underground maintenance network, the informal communication system that connected every engineer, technician, and systems operator across the Martian colonies. "This is Elena Vasquez, Atmospheric Systems. We need to talk." Within minutes, responses flooded in from across New Olympia and the outer settlements. Carlos Rivera from the Water Reclamation Facility reported similar budget denials. Sarah Kim from the geothermal plants described dangerous workarounds they'd been forced to implement. Marcus Chen from the mining operations shared intelligence about increased Earth military communications traffic. Elena recognized some names from technical journals, others from intercolony engineering conferences, but Marcus Chen was different. His messages carried an edge of something more than professional frustration, a certainty that suggested he'd been preparing for this conversation longer than the rest of them. "We can't keep patching systems with prayer and spare parts while Earth treats us like expendable assets," Elena typed into the secure channel. They're gambling with 40,000 lives every time they deny our requests. Then maybe it's time we stopped asking permission, Marcus replied, his words appearing on screens across a dozen facilities simultaneously. Tomorrow night, Engineering Conference Room C, Level 5. We discuss alternatives. Elena stared at the message, knowing that attending would cross a line from frustrated employee to something else entirely. Through the viewport, she watched the last protesters disappear into the transit tunnels, their voices silenced, but their questions hanging in the thin Martian air like ghosts. Chapter 2. The spark ignites. The alarm screamed through Sector 7 at 0347 Martian Standard Time, jolting Elena from restless sleep. Her emergency comm blazed with priority alerts. Critical system failure. Oxygen recycler. Alpha 7 offline. All available personnel respond immediately. Elena was running through the transit tunnels before she was fully awake, her breath forming ice crystals in the suddenly thin air. The numbers on her tablet made her stomach lurch. Oxygen recycler Alpha 7 served residential blocks housing 8,000 people, including the children's dormitories and the elderly care facility. Without it, they had maybe 6 hours before carbon dioxide poisoning became critical. She burst into the recycler chamber to find chaos. Steam billowed from ruptured coolant lines, and the massive atmospheric intake fans had seized completely. James was already there with a crew of technicians, their faces grim behind emergency respirators. "Primary heat exchangers completely fried," James called over the noise of backup systems struggling to compensate. "Looks like the magnetic bearings finally gave out, and the whole assembly tore itself apart." Elena pulled up the emergency repair protocols on her tablet, then cursed. Every component they needed heat exchangers, bearing assemblies, backup filtration units, required authorization from Earth's Colonial Supply Authority. The approval process typically took 6 to 8 weeks. "I'm requesting emergency supplies from the Colonial Administration," she announced, opening a priority channel. The automated response was immediate and devastating. "Your request requires approval from the Colonial Supply Authority. Current processing time, 6-8 weeks. For life-threatening emergencies, contact your sector administrator." Elena stared at the message in disbelief. 8,000 people were slowly suffocating, and Earth's bureaucracy wanted them to file paperwork. "Elena!" James grabbed her arm. "We've got maybe 4 hours before people start collapsing. The backup systems can't handle this load." She made another call, this time to Governor Harrison's emergency line. The response came back 20 minutes later, in the governor's clipped, bureaucratic tone. "Ms. Vasquez, while we sympathize with your situation, emergency supply authorization requires justification that meets strict budgetary guidelines. The Colonial Supply Authority has determined that the cost of expedited delivery exceeds current emergency protocols. We suggest implementing temporary population redistribution to other sectors." "Temporary population redistribution," Elena repeated numbly. "He wants us to evacuate 8,000 people because it's cheaper than fixing their air." Within the hour, word had spread throughout New Olympia. Families huddled in emergency shelters, while technicians worked frantically to jerry-rig connections between overloaded systems in other sectors. Elena watched her brother Diego help elderly residents from the care facility, their wheeled oxygen tanks a stark reminder of how precarious life was on Mars. That evening, as the crisis stabilized through dangerous improvisation and system overloads that would fail within days, Elena made her way to Engineering Conference Room C. She found Marcus Chen waiting with 37 other engineers, technicians, and system supervisors, people she'd worked alongside for years, now united by shared fury. Marcus was not what she'd expected. Tall and lean with graying temples, he carried himself with the bearing of someone accustomed to command. His voice was calm, measured, and absolutely certain. "Today proved what many of us have suspected for years," Marcus began, his eyes moving across the assembled group. Earth doesn't see us as citizens. We're assets to be managed, expenses to be minimized, risks to be calculated. When 8,000 Martian lives weighed against Earth's budget projections, the budget won. Dr. Sarah Okafor, New Olympia's chief medical officer, leaned forward in her chair. Marcus, we're all angry, but what exactly are you proposing? Marcus activated a holographic display showing the colonial charter, the document that had governed Mars since the first permanent settlements. Article 12 states that colonial populations have the right to petition Earth's government for representation when local population exceeds 25,000. Mars passed that threshold 3 years ago. Article 17 guarantees essential life support systems will be maintained according to Earth safety standards. We've documented 47 critical violations in the past 6 months alone. Elena felt her pulse quicken. You're talking about legal action? I'm talking about demanding what's already ours by right, Marcus replied. But if Earth continues to ignore legal obligations, he paused, letting the implication hang in the recycled air. Then perhaps it's time Mars governed itself. The room erupted in nervous chatter. Dr. Okafor looked troubled, while several of the mining supervisors nodded grimly. Elena thought about the failing systems across the colony, the mounting death toll from acceptable risk calculations made by people who'd never breathed Martian air. What are you asking of us? She said finally. Marcus smiled, and Elena saw something that made her both hopeful and afraid, the look of a man who'd been planning for this moment far longer than any of them realized. I'm asking you to help me save our world, he said, even if it means defying Earth to do it. Outside the conference room windows, the pale Martian dawn crept across the horizon, painting the sky the color of rust and revolution. Chapter 3. Opening Salvos. 3 weeks after the meeting in Conference Room C, Elena found herself crouched in the shadows of Launch Bay 12, watching Marcus Chen's plan unfold with terrifying precision. The Martian Liberation Front. A name that still felt surreal on her tongue had grown from 37 angry engineers to over 2,000 colonists across 5 major settlements. Marcus had spent those weeks building a network that spanned from mining foremen to hydroponics supervisors, from shuttle pilots to communications technicians. Now, at 0600 MST on Mars Foundation Day, a date Marcus had chosen with deliberate symbolism, they were making their move. Phoenix Base to all units, Marcus's voice crackled through encrypted comms. Operation Red Dawn is go. Repeat, Red Dawn is go. Across New Olympia, carefully coordinated teams moved simultaneously. Elena watched through her tablet as security feeds showed MLF members taking control of the primary spaceport, their movements coordinated like a military operation. At the mining complex, Diego's team secured the mineral processing facilities that supplied Earth with rare metals worth billions. Communications arrays, power grids, water treatment plants. Every piece of infrastructure that kept Mars running fell under MLF control within 2 hours. Elena's own assignment was the Atmospheric Control Center, the nerve center that regulated air quality for the entire colony. She and her team encountered no resistance. The colonial security forces were spread too thin across the planet, and many sympathized with the rebellion anyway. Elena, you need to see this, James called from the main console. On the central display, Marcus appeared in what looked like the colonial governor's office, though Governor Harrison was nowhere to be seen. Citizens of Mars and Earth, Marcus began, his voice carrying across all communication channels. Today, we reclaim our right to self-determination. The colonial charter promised us representation and protection. Earth has provided neither. Therefore, by the authority vested in free Martians, I declare the independence of the Mars Colonial Republic. Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Martian atmosphere. They'd crossed the line from civil disobedience to outright rebellion. The response from Earth was swift and predictable. Within 8 hours, Admiral Torres's 5th Colonial Fleet had departed from Luna Station 12 heavy cruisers, 36 destroyers, and a fleet carrier that dwarfed anything in the Martian shipping registry. Elena watched the tactical display with growing unease as the Earth Armada accelerated toward Mars, their estimated arrival time 72 days. But Marcus had anticipated this too. In converted mining ships and repurposed cargo haulers, the newly christened Martian Defense Force launched to meet them. Elena watched from the control center as 24 vessels welders and ore processors, hastily fitted with improvised weapons, took position around Mars's orbital space. The first engagement came sooner than expected. 3 Earth reconnaissance ships on long-range patrol reached Deimos, Mars's outer moon, only to find Captain Lisa Rodriguez waiting with a wing of converted haulers. The battle was brief and decisive. Rodriguez's ships knew every asteroid, every gravitational anomaly in Martian space. They used that knowledge to devastating effect, crippling 2 Earth ships before vanishing into the debris field around Deimos. "First blood to Mars," Marcus announced over the colony-wide comm system. "Earth's admirals will learn that we know our home better than they ever could." Elena wanted to share his confidence, but the tactical reality was sobering. Rodriguez had achieved surprise against a small scouting force. When Admiral Torres arrived with the full fleet, the improvised Martian Navy would face ships designed for war, crewed by professionals who'd spent their careers preparing for exactly this kind of conflict. The celebration in New Olympia's Central Plaza that night felt desperate around the edges. Colonists cheered Marcus's speeches about Martian courage and ingenuity, but Elena noticed how many kept glancing at the night sky, where Earth hung like a pale blue threat among the stars. Dr. Okafor found Elena on the observation deck as the crowd dispersed. "You look troubled for someone who just helped liberate a planet," she said, settling beside Elena on the bench. "Did we?" Elena stared out at the rust-colored landscape that had been humanity's second home for 3 generations. "Or did we just paint a target on 40,000 civilians?" "Marcus believes we can win," Dr. Okafor replied, though her voice carried its own doubts. Elena pulled up the tactical display on her tablet, showing the relative positions of the Earth and Martian fleets. The numbers were sobering. Earth's forces outgunned them 5-1, with better ships, better training, and the industrial capacity to replace their losses. Mars had courage, local knowledge, and desperation. It might not be enough. "Sarah," Elena said quietly, "what happens if we can't win? What happens if Earth decides that an example needs to be made?" Dr. Okafor was quiet for a long moment, watching the pale Earthlight play across the Martian horizon. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Then we'd better hope Marcus's plan is better than it looks from here." Above them, the stars wheeled in their eternal dance, indifferent to the human drama playing out beneath Mars's thin atmosphere. Somewhere among those distant lights, Admiral Torres's fleet was accelerating toward a confrontation that would determine the fate of 2 worlds. Chapter 4. David versus Goliath. Admiral Torres arrived with the fury of an avenging god. Elena watched from the atmospheric control center as Earth's 5th Colonial Fleet decelerated into Mars orbit, their formation a perfect display of military precision. 12 heavy cruisers flanked the massive fleet carrier Terran Pride, while destroyer squadrons spread out in search patterns designed to eliminate any hiding places among Mars's moons and asteroid debris. The orbital bombardment began at dawn. The first targets were military, the improvised launch facilities where the Martian Defense Force had assembled their converted ships. Elena felt the impacts through the colony's superstructure as kinetic rounds traveling at significant fractions of light speed turned launch bays into molten craters. Within an hour, 3/4 of Mars's improvised fleet had been destroyed on the ground. "All civilians to emergency shelters," Marcus's voice echoed through the colony's comm system. though his usual confidence seemed strained. This is a temporary setback. We knew Earth would strike first, and hard. We're prepared for this. Elena wasn't sure they were prepared for anything like this. She monitored atmospheric readings as explosions rocked the colony's outer districts. The bombardment was surgical. Earth's forces were destroying military targets, while carefully avoiding civilian areas and critical life support infrastructure. They wanted Mars surrendered, not dead. Captain Rodriguez's remaining ships fought back with desperate courage and intimate knowledge of Martian space. Elena watched tactical displays as Martian fighters used the shadow of Phobos to mask their approach, striking at Earth destroyers with improvised missiles before disappearing into the asteroid belt. They scored hits, even disabled a few ships, but for every Earth vessel damaged, Mars lost 2 of its own. The blockade tightened like a noose. Earth forces established control points around all major orbital approaches, cutting off supply lines that Mars depended on for specialized equipment and medical supplies. Within a week, the colony's emergency stockpiles began running low. Dr. Okafor's medical reports painted a grim picture. "We're already seeing malnutrition in the children," she told Elena during one of their increasingly frequent crisis meetings. "The hydroponic systems are running at 60% capacity because we can't get replacement nutrients. And if someone gets seriously injured..." She gestured helplessly at her depleted medical supplies. Elena found Marcus in the underground command bunker he'd established beneath the colony's central district. Banks of monitors showed tactical data from across the solar system, but the story they told was unrelentingly bleak. Mars controlled perhaps 10% of the orbital space around their own planet. "We're losing," Elena said without preamble. Marcus looked up from a holographic display showing fleet positions, his face drawn with exhaustion. "We're adapting. Rodriguez has developed new tactics using the asteroid belt. Our remaining ground-based weapons are still functional. Earth may control orbit, but they can't land troops without taking massive casualties." "Marcus, look at the numbers." Elena activated her tablet, showing him the supply projections. "We have food for maybe 6 more weeks at current rationing levels. Medical supplies are already critically low. 3 more atmospheric processors have failed, and we can't repair them without parts that are sitting in Earth's orbital warehouses." "Then we make Earth pay for every day they keep us under siege," Marcus replied, his voice hardening. "Admiral Torres thinks she can starve us into submission. Let her try." Elena stared at him, recognizing the dangerous edge that had crept into Marcus's voice over the past weeks. "And if that means children dying? Elderly people suffocating when the air recyclers fail?" "Earth is the one holding the knife," Marcus snapped. "Every death here is on their hands, not ours." That night, Elena stood in the main plaza watching families huddle around makeshift heaters, their breath visible in the increasingly cold air. Power rationing meant non-essential heating had been cut, and non-essential seemed to include everything that made life bearable rather than merely survivable. She noticed Mrs. Chen sitting with her infant daughter, the same baby Elena had worried about during the oxygen crisis that had started all of this. The child was thinner now, her cries weaker than they'd been weeks ago. Mrs. Chen looked up as Elena approached, her eyes holding a question Elena couldn't answer. "How much longer?" Mrs. Chen asked quietly. Elena looked around the plaza at the families maintaining their daily routines despite the fear, at the children playing games that now included orbital bombardment and Earth patrol, at the teenagers who'd volunteered to maintain critical systems while the adults focused on the war effort. "I don't know," Elena admitted, "but we're going to find a way through this." She hoped she sounded more confident than she felt. Above them, Earth's fleet maintained its silent vigil, a constellation of hostile stars that grew brighter each night as they tightened their grip on Mars. Elena wondered how many more weeks the colony could endure before Marcus's revolution became a funeral pyre for everyone she'd ever known. In the distance, another atmospheric processor coughed and wheezed, its failing systems a countdown timer marking the moments until Mars either found salvation or surrendered to slow suffocation under the weight of Earth's superior firepower. Chapter 5. The Unthinkable Gambit. Elena found Marcus in the deepest level of the command bunker, surrounded by holographic displays that cast eerie shadows across his gaunt face. 6 weeks of siege had transformed him from the confident leader who'd declared independence into something harder, more desperate. The tactical displays showed the same story they'd told for days. Mars controlled less than 5% of their orbital space, and the blockade was slowly strangling the life from the colony. "I've been reviewing our options," Marcus said without looking up from the central hologram. "Admiral Torres thinks she has us trapped, but she's forgotten something important." Elena approached the display, recognizing the familiar orbital mechanics charts that showed Earth's position relative to Mars. But something was different. Additional trajectory lines crisscrossed the display, originating from the asteroid belt. "Marcus, what is this?" He activated a new overlay, and Elena's blood went cold. The display showed asteroid 2187 Hermes, a kilometer-wide chunk of nickel iron that mining crews had been tracking for months. But the projected trajectory had been altered. Instead of its natural orbit around the Sun, new calculations showed it on a collision course with Earth. "The Damocles Protocol," Marcus said quietly. 3 months ago, I had our people in the mining division download every access code from Earth's planetary defense network. Officially, it was for resource coordination. In reality, he gestured at the display. "Earth's asteroid defense grid has a critical vulnerability. If we can disable the right satellites for exactly 17 minutes, Hermes will get through." Elena stared at the impact projections in horror. The asteroid would strike Earth's Pacific Ocean with the force of 10,000 nuclear weapons, triggering tsunamis that would devastate coastal cities worldwide. The death toll estimates made her stomach lurch. 2 billion people, minimum. "You're talking about genocide," she whispered. "I'm talking about survival," Marcus snapped, his eyes blazing with desperate conviction. "Torres is slowly murdering every person on this planet. Children are dying, Elena. Mrs. Chen's baby died yesterday. Did you know that? Malnutrition and respiratory failure because Earth won't let medical supplies through their blockade." Elena hadn't known about the baby, and the news hit her like a physical blow. She thought of Mrs. Chen's quiet dignity, the way she'd asked, "How much longer?" with such fragile hope. "That doesn't justify this," Elena said, struggling to keep her voice steady. "You're talking about killing 2 billion innocent people." "Innocent?" Marcus laughed bitterly. "Earth's population elects the government that's murdering us. They benefit from our resources while denying us basic rights. Their comfort is built on our suffering, on our—" Dr. Okafor's voice came from behind them. "Marcus, please tell me you're not seriously considering this madness." She'd entered the command center quietly, her medical whites stained with the evidence of too many hopeless cases. Marcus turned to face her, and Elena saw that whatever humanity had once tempered his ambitions was rapidly burning away. "Sarah, we have maybe 2 weeks before the colony's life support systems fail completely. Earth knows this. They're waiting for us to watch our children suffocate rather than negotiate in good faith. So your solution is to become the monster they paint us as?" Dr. Okafor stepped closer to the holographic display, her face pale as she absorbed the implications. "Marcus, this isn't leverage, it's mass murder." "It's the only card we have left to play," Marcus replied. He activated another display showing communication intercepts from Earth's fleet. "Torres received new orders yesterday. Maintain blockade until complete capitulation. No negotiation, no compromise. They mean to break us completely. Elena studied the asteroid trajectory calculations, her engineer's mind automatically processing the physics involved. The window was impossibly narrow. 17 minutes, when specific defense satellites would be in communication shadow during a routine maintenance cycle. The timing would have to be perfect. The computer infiltration flawless. And even if it worked, "Marcus," she said slowly, "even if this succeeds, even if Earth surrenders to stop the impact, do you really think they'll let Mars exist after this? They'll glass the entire planet, rather than negotiate with people who held a gun to their homeworld's head. Then we'll die as free Martians instead of Earth slaves," Marcus said with the finality of someone who'd already made his choice. Elena felt the weight of the moment settling around them like Martian dust. In the displays around the command center, she could see the colony's vital signs. Atmospheric pressure dropping in 3 sectors, food reserves down to critical levels, medical supplies nearly exhausted, 40,000 people slowly dying while Earth's fleet maintained its patient siege. But the alternative Marcus offered was worse than surrender. It was damnation for both worlds. "How long until you implement this?" Dr. Okafor asked quietly. Marcus checked his chronometer. "Hermes reaches the optimal position in 36 hours. The communication window opens at 14:30 Mars Standard Time tomorrow." Elena stared at the holographic asteroid, watching its projected path toward the blue-green world where humanity had been born. Somewhere on that distant planet, children played in gardens under open skies, never imagining that their death might be coded into a Martian computer program. "And if we refuse to help you with this?" she asked. Marcus's expression didn't change, but his hand moved subtly toward the sidearm he'd started carrying. "Then I'll find people who understand what survival really means." The command center fell silent except for the hum of failing atmospheric recyclers and the distant rumble of Earth's periodic bombardments. Elena realized that somewhere in the darkness between worlds, Marcus Chen had crossed a line from which there might be no return for any of them. Chapter 6. Earth's Ultimatum. Elena was in the atmospheric control center, desperately trying to keep Sector 12's failing recyclers operational, when every screen in the colony simultaneously switched to an emergency broadcast from Earth. President Carter appeared against the backdrop of the United Nations Assembly, her face grave with the weight of terrible knowledge. Behind her, representatives from every Earth nation sat in stunned silence, and Elena realized with growing dread that something had gone catastrophically wrong with operational security. "Citizens of Earth and Mars," President Carter began, her voice carrying across 93 million miles of space with crystal clarity. 6 hours ago, our intelligence services intercepted communications detailing a plot of unprecedented horror. The current leadership of the Mars Colonial Republic intends to weaponize asteroid 2187 Hermes, redirecting it toward Earth in what they call the Damocles Protocol. Elena felt the blood drain from her face. Around the control center, technicians stopped their work to stare at the screens in shock. Somehow, Earth had discovered Marcus's plan. The president continued, her words falling like hammer blows. "According to our analysis, this attack would result in the deaths of approximately 2 billion human beings, men, women, and children, who have never raised a hand against Mars. The asteroid impact would trigger global tsunamis, massive earthquakes, and a nuclear winter that would devastate Earth's biosphere for decades." The broadcast cut to technical displays showing Hermes's altered trajectory and the projected impact zones. Elena watched in horrified fascination as Earth scientists had calculated the same devastating consequences she'd seen in Marcus's bunker, but presented now to a shocked interplanetary audience. "We cannot and will not permit this act of planetary genocide," President Carter declared, her voice hardening. Therefore, I am issuing the following ultimatum to the leaders of the Mars Rebellion. You have 48 hours to surrender unconditionally and provide complete technical details of your asteroid manipulation systems. Failure to comply will result in what we must term total pacification of the Mars colonies. The phrase hit Elena like a physical blow. Total pacification, the sanitized term for complete annihilation of every human settlement on Mars. President Carter's image was replaced by Admiral Torres broadcasting from the bridge of the Terran Pride. To make our position absolutely clear, the Admiral said, we are repositioning the Fifth Fleet for comprehensive orbital bombardment of all Martian settlements. Every dome, every tunnel, every life support system will be targeted. We take no pleasure in this necessity, but we will not allow Earth to be held hostage by extremists. Around Elena, the control center erupted in panicked conversations. Through the viewports, she could see Earth's warships moving into new positions, their weapons arrays trained on the colony below. The casual precision of their movements was terrifying. This wasn't bluster or negotiating tactics. Earth was preparing to murder every person on Mars. Her comm unit chimed with an emergency message from Dr. Okafor. Elena, get to Medical Bay 7 immediately. We need to talk. Elena found the medical bay in chaos. Families were bringing in children showing advanced signs of malnutrition and respiratory distress, the inevitable result of 6 weeks under siege. Dr. Okafor pulled her into a private consultation room, her face strained with exhaustion and fear. Elena, please tell me you weren't involved in Marcus's insane plan, she said without preamble. I only learned about it yesterday, Elena replied. Sarah, how did Earth find out? Marcus was obsessive about operational security. Dr. Okafor's expression grew even more troubled. I think I know. 3 days ago, Lieutenant Patterson from the communications section came to me with severe anxiety symptoms. During treatment, she mentioned being asked to help encrypt some kind of special operation data. I think someone in Marcus's inner circle got cold feet. The implications hit Elena immediately. If someone had leaked the Damocles Protocol to Earth, then the 48-hour ultimatum wasn't just diplomatic pressure. It was a countdown to genocide, one way or another. We have to stop this, Elena said, both of this Marcus's plan and Earth's retaliation. Dr. Okafor gestured toward the screens showing Earth's fleet repositioning. Marcus has gone completely over the edge, and Earth is preparing to commit exactly the kind of atrocity that drove us to rebellion in the first place. Elena pulled up her tablet, accessing the colony's communication systems. Across New Olympia, she could see panic spreading as families absorbed the reality of their situation. They were trapped between their own leader's madness and Earth's terrible resolve. There's a third option, Elena said slowly, an idea forming that terrified and energized her in equal measure. We stop Marcus ourselves. Dr. Okafor stared at her. Elena, that's talking about a coup against our own government. Our government is about to commit genocide and get us all killed in response, Elena replied. Marcus has 36 hours before the communication window opens for Hermes. Earth has given us 48 hours to surrender. That gives us maybe 12 hours to save 2 planets. Through the medical bay's viewports, Elena could see the Martian surface stretching toward the horizon, the rust-colored landscape that 40,000 people called home, now threatened with complete annihilation because one man's desperation had metastasized into something monstrous. Sarah, she said quietly, I need to know if you're with me, because I can't do this alone. Dr. Okafor was quiet for a long moment, listening to the sounds of the medical bay, crying children, worried parents, the hiss of overworked life support systems. When she looked up, her eyes held the same dangerous resolve Elena had seen in Marcus weeks earlier, but tempered by something he had lost. Basic human decency. What do you need? Chapter 7. The Coup. Elena moved through the maintenance tunnels beneath New Olympia with 12 others, their footsteps muffled by the constant hum of failing life support systems. In the 8 hours since Earth's ultimatum, she and Dr. Okafor had quietly contacted every moderate voice in the MLF engineers who'd joined for better working conditions, medical staff horrified by the blockade's toll on civilians, and mining supervisors who wanted autonomy, not genocide. "Marcus has 6 loyalists with him in the command bunker," whispered Captain Rodriguez, who had returned from orbit after losing her last ship to Earth's destroyers. "They're all armed, and they've sealed the blast doors. He's not taking any chances." Elena checked her tablet, displaying the colony's schematic. Marcus had turned the command center into a fortress, with only one way in, through the main access shaft. But Elena had spent 15 years maintaining every system in New Olympia, including the emergency ventilation ducts that Marcus's people had overlooked. "There," she pointed to a narrow service tunnel that connected to the command center's atmospheric recycling system. "It's barely wide enough for one person, and we'll have to shut down air circulation to the entire level, but it bypasses their security." Dr. Okafor checked her chronometer. "Marcus starts the Damocles sequence in 4 hours. Even if we stop him, Earth's deadline is in 36 hours. "One crisis at a time," Elena replied, though her stomach churned with the knowledge that they might only be preventing one form of mass murder to enable another. The approach through the ventilation system was claustrophobic nightmare. Elena crawled through ducts barely 18 inches wide, her breathing echoing in the confined space as she navigated by the glow of her tablet. Behind her, Captain Rodriguez and 2 other volunteers followed, their movement limited by the narrow passages. Elena reached the command center's air intake and peered through the grate. Marcus stood before the central hologram, now showing real-time tracking of asteroid Hermes as it approached the critical position. His 6 remaining loyalists were positioned around the room's perimeter, weapons ready, their faces showing the strain of men who knew they were preparing to commit an act that would damn them in history. "Hermes reaches optimal position in 3 hours and 47 minutes, Marcus announced to his team. "Earth's defense grid vulnerability window opens in exactly 4 hours. We'll have 17 minutes to disable the right satellites and ensure the asteroid gets through." Elena felt sick. Marcus was still proceeding with the plan, despite knowing it would trigger Earth's retaliation against Mars. She activated her comm unit, sending a coded signal to the rest of her team positioned outside the command center's main entrance. The coordinated assault began with Elena cutting power to the command center's internal lighting. In the sudden darkness, she kicked out the ventilation grate and dropped into the room as Captain Rodriguez and her team breached the main entrance through the confusion. "Stand down!" Elena shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Marcus, it's over!" Marcus spun toward her voice, his sidearm already drawn. "Elena, I should have known you'd betray everything we've worked for." "I'm trying to save it," she replied, keeping her hands visible as Rodriguez's team secured the other loyalists. "Marcus, Earth is going to kill every person on this planet if you go through with Damocles. 40,000 innocent people will die because of your obsession with revenge." 40,000 people are dying anyway, Marcus snarled, his weapon trained on Elena's chest. "Earth's blockade is murdering us slowly. At least this way, our deaths will mean something." Dr. Okafor entered through the main door, her hands raised peacefully. "Marcus, I've been treating the children affected by malnutrition. Do you know what they ask me? They ask when the Earth ships will go away so their parents can get food again. They don't want to be martyrs for Martian independence. They just want to grow up." "They won't get that chance if we surrender," Marcus replied, but Elena heard the doubt creeping into his voice. "Earth will make examples of us. The leadership will be executed, and the colonies will be placed under permanent military occupation." "Maybe," Elena said carefully, taking a small step closer. "But genocide guarantees Our children have no future at all. Marcus, please, let us try to find another way." For a moment, the command center was silent except for the distant rumble of Earth's ships, maintaining their orbital bombardment positions. Elena could see the conflict in Marcus's eyes, the war between the reasonable man who'd started this rebellion and the extremist he'd become under pressure. The moment shattered when Marcus's finger tightened on the trigger. "I'm sorry, Elena, but I won't let Earth win." Captain Rodriguez's stunner caught Marcus in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending his weapon clattering across the floor. He collapsed against the central console, his face twisted with rage and betrayal. "Secure him," Elena ordered, though her voice shook with the magnitude of what they'd just done. They'd overthrown the government of Mars, committed treason against their own revolution, all in the desperate hope that surrender might be preferable to mutual annihilation. Dr. Okafor was already at the communication console, her fingers flying over the controls. "I'm opening a channel to Admiral Torres. What do we tell Earth?" Elena stared at the holographic display showing Hermes's position, then at Marcus, who was glaring at them with the fury of a true believer, confronted with apostasy. Outside the command center, 40,000 Martians waited to learn whether their home would survive the next 36 hours. "We tell them the truth," Elena said finally, "that we've stopped the Damocles Protocol, and we're ready to negotiate." She hoped Admiral Torres would listen before ordering the destruction of everything they'd just risked their lives to save. Chapter 8. Negotiations. The communication link to Admiral Torres crackled, but Elena could hear the skepticism in the Admiral's voice clearly enough. "Ms. Vasquez, you claim to have overthrown Marcus Chen and prevented the Damocles Protocol," Torres said from her position aboard the Terran Pride. "Yet our sensors show asteroid Hermes is still on its collision trajectory. How do we know this isn't an elaborate deception?" Elena stood in the command center surrounded by the evidence of their desperate coup Marcus unconscious and restrained, his loyalists disarmed, and the Damocles control systems now under her team's control. "Admiral, I'm transmitting the complete technical specifications of the asteroid redirection system to your fleet. Your analysts can verify that we're shutting down the manipulation arrays." On the main display, Elena watched as her people began the complex process of deactivating the orbital thrusters that had been slowly altering Hermes's path. Each shutdown signal took precious minutes to reach the asteroid, and the margin for error was terrifyingly small. "Admiral," Dr. Okafor interrupted, stepping forward to the communication console, "I'm Dr. Sarah Okafor, Chief Medical Officer of New Olympia. I need you to understand, we're not surrendering because we fear your retaliation. We're stopping this madness because it's wrong, regardless of the consequences to ourselves." Torres's image on the screen showed a professional military officer struggling with a situation far beyond normal operational parameters. "Dr. Okafor, your intentions may be noble, but President Carter has been very clear. Mars attempted to hold Earth hostage with weapons of mass destruction. The precedent this sets—" "The precedent has already been set," Elena interjected. "Earth's response to our rebellion was collective punishment starving civilian populations to force political surrender. Marcus's extremism was born from Earth's own willingness to sacrifice innocent lives for strategic objectives." A new voice joined the communication, President Carter herself, speaking from Earth with the authority of humanity's homeworld. "Ms. Vasquez, are you suggesting that Earth bears responsibility for this situation?" Elena felt the weight of history pressing down on her shoulders. 40,000 Martian lives hung on her next words, but so did the possibility of any future relationship between Earth and its colonies. "Madam President, I'm suggesting that both our worlds have made terrible mistakes," she replied carefully. "Earth treated Mars as a resource extraction colony rather than a community of human beings. We responded with rebellion and, ultimately, Marcus's extremism. Now we're all facing the consequences." "What are you proposing?" President Carter asked. Elena looked around the command center at her fellow conspirators, Captain Rodriguez, who'd lost everything fighting for Martian independence, Dr. Okafor, who'd seen too many children suffer from Earth's blockade, the engineers and technicians who'd risked execution by overthrowing their own government. "Autonomy?" she said finally. "Not independence. Mars isn't ready to survive alone. And today proves we can't be trusted with that responsibility yet. But self-governance under Earth's broader authority, a Martian parliament to handle local affairs, an elected governor instead of Earth appointees, fair resource-sharing agreements instead of exploitative taxation." President Carter was quiet for a long moment. In the background, Elena could hear urgent conversations as Earth's leadership consulted with military advisors and colonial policy experts. "Ms. Vasquez," the president finally replied, "you're asking us to reward rebellion with political concessions." "I'm asking you to prevent the cycle from repeating," Elena said. "Mars rebelled because we felt powerless and voiceless. Grant us meaningful self-governance. And you remove the conditions that created Marcus's extremism. Continue treating us as subjects rather than citizens, and you'll face another rebellion within a generation." Admiral Torres's voice cut through the discussion. "Madam President, our technical analysis confirms that the Martians are indeed shutting down the asteroid manipulation systems. Hermes will pass harmlessly through the outer system in approximately 6 hours." Elena felt a moment of relief, but she knew the larger crisis remained unresolved. Earth's fleet was still positioned for the total destruction of Mars, and President Carter had not yet indicated whether she was willing to consider political compromise. "There's something else," Dr. Okafor added quietly. "If you proceed with the total pacification of Mars, you'll be committing exactly the kind of mass murder that Marcus threatened against Earth. The moral authority that gives Earth the right to govern human expansion into space depends on being better than our worst impulses, not succumbing to them." Elena watched President Carter's image on the screen, seeing the woman struggle with a decision that would define humanity's future among the stars. The silence stretched across the void between worlds, filled only with the hum of life support systems and the distant rumble of Earth's weapons trained on everything Elena had ever called home. "Dr. Okafor raises a valid point," President Carter said finally. "Earth cannot maintain moral authority through mass murder, regardless of provocation. Admiral Torres, suspend bombardment preparations. We're going to explore Ms. Vasquez's autonomy proposal." Elena felt her knees go weak with relief. It wasn't victory, not yet, but it was hope that both worlds might survive to build something better than the cycle of oppression and rebellion that had brought them to the brink of mutual destruction. Chapter 9. The Compromise. 72 hours of continuous negotiations had transformed the command center into an exhausted war room of diplomacy. Elena sat across from holographic projections of President Carter, Admiral Torres, and Earth's colonial secretary, James Morrison, while technical advisors and legal experts from both worlds worked through the intricate details of what would become known as the Mars Autonomy Accord. The hardest battles weren't over grand principles. Both sides agreed on the need for Martian self-governance and continued unity within Earth's sphere. The devil lived in the details: taxation rates, defense responsibilities, resource extraction rights, and the delicate balance between local autonomy and interplanetary security. "The mining concessions remain problematic," Secretary Morrison said, his image flickering slightly as the communication link adjusted to Mars's orbital position. "Earth corporations have invested trillions of dollars in Martian infrastructure. We can't simply nationalize those assets." Elena rubbed her eyes, fatigue making concentration difficult. "Secretary Morrison, we're not proposing nationalization. The new resource-sharing framework ensures Earth corporations maintain their operational rights, while Mars receives fair compensation for our minerals and labor. Instead of the current 90-10 split in Earth's favor, we're proposing 60-40.
That's a massive shift in colonial revenue, Admiral Torres interjected. Earth's taxpayers funded the initial colonization efforts. They deserve return on that investment.
Dr. Okafor leaned forward, her voice carrying the weight of someone who'd seen the human cost of economic exploitation. Admiral, those taxpayers also deserve colonies that thrive rather than rebel. The current extraction model created the conditions that nearly led to interplanetary war. A more equitable arrangement benefits everyone. President Carter had been quiet for the past hour, reviewing legal documents that would fundamentally reshape humanity's expansion into space. When she spoke, her words carried the gravity of historical decision-making. The proposed Martian Parliament would have authority over internal affairs, healthcare, education, local infrastructure, civil law. Earth retains control over interplanetary defense, foreign policy regarding other colonies, and maintains veto power over any Martian legislation that affects Earth's security interests. Is this acceptable? Elena looked around the command center at the people who'd risked everything to prevent genocide. Captain Rodriguez nodded slowly. She'd lost ships and crews fighting for independence, but she understood that compromise might achieve more than continued conflict. Dr. Okafor's expression showed cautious optimism. Even some of Marcus's former supporters, released from detention to participate in the transition planning, seemed relieved by the prospect of peace. "It's acceptable," Elena said finally. "But we need guarantees that Earth won't use the security veto to override local governance in bad faith." "Joint Oversight Committee," President Carter replied. "Equal representation from Earth and Mars, with binding arbitration for disputed cases. No single world can dominate the process." The framework was elegant in its balance. Mars would govern itself day to day, while Earth maintained the authority necessary to prevent another near catastrophe like the Damocles Protocol. It wasn't the independence Marcus had demanded, but it addressed the fundamental grievances that had driven the rebellion. "There's one more issue," Elena said carefully. "Marcus Chen and his inner circle. Earth has demanded they face trial for conspiracy to commit genocide. Mars's population sees them as freedom fighters, regardless of their methods. How do we handle this without creating martyrs?" President Carter and Admiral Torres exchanged glances across the communication link. This was perhaps the most delicate aspect of the entire agreement: justice for the extremists, without undermining the legitimacy of Martian grievances. "Modified exile," President Carter said after a long pause. "Chen and his core conspirators will be relocated to the outer colonies, Jupiter's moons, where their engineering expertise can contribute to new settlement efforts while they serve their sentence. They'll be barred from Mars and Earth for 20 years, but they won't face execution or permanent incarceration." Elena felt a complicated mix of relief and frustration. Marcus had nearly triggered the destruction of two worlds, but she remembered the reasonable man he'd once been, driven to extremism by circumstances that might have broken anyone. Perhaps exile would give him a chance to rebuild rather than become a symbol of martyrdom. "The families affected by the blockade," Dr. Okafor added quietly. "The children who suffered malnutrition, the elderly who died from medical supply shortages. There needs to be accountability for that suffering, too." "Reconstruction assistance," Secretary Morrison replied. "Earth will provide medical supplies, food shipments, and technical support to repair the damage from the siege. It's not compensation exactly, but it's acknowledgement that the blockade inflicted unnecessary suffering." Elena stood and walked to the viewport overlooking New Olympia's central plaza. Below, families were emerging from emergency shelters for the first time in weeks, children playing in the filtered sunlight while their parents began the work of rebuilding their community. Earth's ships still hung in orbit, but their weapons were no longer trained on the colony. "Madam President," Elena said, turning back to the communication console. "I believe we have an agreement." President Carter smiled, the first genuine expression of warmth Elena had seen from her during the entire crisis. "Ms. Vasquez, I'm appointing you as Mars's first Minister of Infrastructure in the new autonomous government. Your planet will need someone who understands both the technical challenges of colonial life and the political realities of interplanetary governance." Elena felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders, not the desperate burden of preventing war, but the more complex challenge of building peace. Through the viewport, she could see the rust-colored horizon where humanity's second home stretched toward a future that would be neither Earth's dominion nor Marcus's independent republic, but something new entirely. "I accept," she said, knowing that the real work was just beginning. Chapter 10. New Dawn. 5 years after the Mars Autonomy Accord, Elena stood in the observation deck of Olympus shipyard, watching the completed Ares Endeavour undergo its final pre-launch systems checks. The deep space exploration vessel stretched nearly 2 kilometers from bow to stern, its sleek form a testament to the engineering collaboration between Earth and Mars that would have been impossible under the old colonial system. "All systems are showing green across the board," reported Dr. James Wright, her former maintenance partner who now served as chief of Martian spacecraft engineering. "We'll be ready for the outer system survey mission in 3 weeks." Elena smiled, remembering the failing atmospheric processors and jury-rigged life support systems that had defined their old existence. The shipyard around them hummed with activity. Martian engineers working alongside Earth specialists, their combined expertise pushing the boundaries of human space exploration. Through the vast viewport, New Olympia sprawled across the Martian landscape, its original domes now connected to a dozen new districts that housed over 200,000 colonists. The population boom had followed naturally from the Accord's success. When people felt secure in their future, they chose to build families and communities rather than simply survive. "Minister Vasquez," her assistant's voice came through the comm system. "President Carter is ready for the dedication ceremony." Elena made her way to the shipyard's main assembly hall, where dignitaries from across the solar system had gathered for the launch celebration. President Carter's image appeared via hologram alongside the newly elected Martian Prime Minister Sarah Okafor, whose medical background had proven invaluable in transitioning from crisis management to long-term governance. 5 years ago, President Carter began, her voice carrying across the assembled crowd. Mars and Earth stood on the brink of mutual destruction. Today, we stand together at the threshold of deep space exploration. The Ares Endeavour represents more than technological achievement. It embodies the principle that humanity's greatest advances come through cooperation rather than conflict. Elena looked out at the audience, recognizing faces that had shaped the tumultuous journey from rebellion to reconciliation. Captain Rodriguez, now Admiral of the Martian Space Guard, sat with her young daughter, who'd never known a Mars under blockade. Dr. Okafor's medical staff, no longer rationing supplies for malnourished children, now worked on advanced life support systems for the Jupiter colonies. Even some of Marcus Chen's former engineers were present, their expertise in orbital mechanics proving valuable for the deep space mission planning. "The Jupiter expansion project represents our shared future," Prime Minister Okafor added, her voice carrying the calm authority that had helped negotiate the original accord. Mars's experience with closed-loop life support systems, combined with Earth's manufacturing capacity and deep space navigation expertise, makes possible what neither world could achieve alone. Elena remembered the communication delays that had frustrated colonial life under Earth's direct rule. Now those same delays provided natural boundaries that made autonomy not just politically desirable, but practically necessary. Mars governed its internal affairs with the efficiency of local decision-making, while maintaining the security and economic benefits of Earth Alliance.
As the ceremony concluded and the crowd began to disperse, Elena's comm unit chimed with an incoming call from the Jovian colonies. Marcus Chen's face appeared on the small screen, his image transmitted across the hundreds of millions of kilometers that separated Mars from Europa. "Elena," Marcus said, his voice carrying the slight delay of interplanetary communication. "I wanted to congratulate you on the Ares endeavor. Even from out here, we can see what you've accomplished." Elena found a quiet corner of the assembly hall, holding her tablet so she could speak privately with the man who'd nearly triggered the destruction of two worlds. The years had changed him. His hair was completely gray now, and his face carried the weathered look of someone who'd spent time building rather than destroying. "Marcus," she replied carefully, uncertain how to address the man whose exile would continue for 15 more years. "I wanted to thank you," he continued, his eyes sincere despite the digital distortion of the long-distance link, "for stopping me, for finding a better way than the path I was taking us down." Elena studied his face on the screen, seeing genuine remorse mixed with something she hadn't expected. "Peace. The outer colonies treating you well?" Marcus nodded, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Europa's atmospheric processors need constant maintenance. Turns out there's dignity in building systems that keep people alive rather than planning their destruction." He paused, the communication delay adding weight to his words. "Your way was better, Elena. Harder, more complex, requiring more patience than I had, but better." As the call ended and Marcus's image faded from her screen, Elena found herself standing before a memorial wall, honoring those lost during the rebellion and siege. Mrs. Chen's infant daughter was commemorated there, along with the Earth sailors killed in the early space battles and the Martian civilians who died from blockade-related shortages. Their sacrifice had purchased hard-won wisdom about the cost of extremism on both sides. Elena reflected on the path that had brought them here. The rebellion had been necessary. Earth's colonial policies had been genuinely oppressive and unsustainable. But Marcus's extremism had shown how easily righteous anger could become something monstrous. The accord had required both worlds to confront their failures and build something new from the ashes of their mutual mistakes. Outside the shipyard's viewports, the Martian sunset painted the sky in shades of amber and gold, the thin atmosphere creating colors impossible on Earth's thicker air. In the distance, a new transit line carried passengers between the expanding settlements, while cargo ships launched toward the asteroid belt mines that now operated as joint Earth-Mars ventures. Elena's tablet chimed with a message from the Ares Endeavor's navigation team. "Minister, final systems checks complete. All stations report ready for outer solar system departure in 3 weeks." She looked up at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening Martian sky, no longer seeing Earth as a distant oppressor, but as humanity's shared origin point. The blue-green world where the species had learned to dream of distant worlds. Soon, the Ares Endeavor would venture beyond Neptune to survey the mysterious objects in the Kuiper Belt, mapping humanity's next frontier while strengthening the bonds that connected all human settlements across the cosmos. The rebellion that had begun with failing atmospheric processors and bureaucratic indifference had evolved into something neither Marcus nor Earth's colonial administrators could have imagined: a partnership that honored both autonomy and unity, creating space for human diversity while maintaining the connections essential for survival among the stars. Elena smiled, watching the Ares Endeavor catch the last light of the Martian day. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as humanity pushed deeper into space. But tonight belonged to the quiet satisfaction of promises kept and futures built on the foundation of hard-won peace.